Okay, let's unpack this. You reached out with a question that honestly takes real courage to ask. About feeling so weighed down by the past. You mentioned trauma and a compulsion and just feeling like you can't change, even though you really, really want to. So first, thank you for sharing that vulnerability with us.
It really does. It takes immense strength to even approach these painful experiences and, acknowledge the struggles you're facing right now, especially when you feel so uncertain about changing things.
Yeah.
And the feelings you described, that shame, feeling out of control, the guilt, and that really intense internal fight, wanting to quit but feeling like you just can't, well, those things resonate so deeply with what's explored in the material you shared with us.
Absolutely. And what's really striking here is how the information you provided, it offers such deep insights and perspective on this exact struggle.
Yeah.
It just makes it so clear you are far, far from alone in feeling this way.
Yeah, precisely. So our mission really for this deep dive is to carefully unpack the key insights from all this material. We want to help maybe shine a light on the roots of the struggle you're describing and, crucially, highlight some actionable paths forward that the research points to.
Okay, so let's start right there, just acknowledging the struggle itself. You talked about the shame, feeling out of control, the guilt, that constant internal push and pull. It sounds incredibly difficult to live with.
It is. It really is. And it's so important to validate those intense feelings first. What the material really emphasizes is that this specific conflict, wanting so badly to quit but feeling totally incapable, it isn't just a feeling you have. It's actually identified as a defining characteristic of this particular struggle. That push and pull you're experiencing, that's a huge part of it for so many people wrestling with these issues.
Okay, and this is where it gets really insightful, I think, because you shared some specific, very difficult early experiences, exposure at ages 6 and 9, your father's involvement, and then later the public sharing of trauma.
Yeah.
How does the material help us understand how those events might, lay a foundation for what's happening now?
Well, the material indicates that those kinds of early experiences, particularly exposure to sexual content or intentions at such a young age,
Yeah.
and especially when it's linked to someone like a parent, a primary influence, that can create a really complex and challenging foundation for sexual development later on.
Right.
And then when that gets compounded by something like a public disclosure of trauma, it just deepens that complexity massively. There's actually a strong link noted in the research between that early exposure to pornography, especially starting young, and a deeper level of compulsive involvement later in life.
But it's not just the exposure itself, but the age is critical and the context,
Mm-hmm.
particularly involving a figure like a parent.
Exactly. And the analysis goes even further. It suggests that trauma or difficult early life experiences, things like maybe parental neglect or conflict, which often show up in the background of these kinds of struggles, they can profoundly shape our coping mechanisms. So seeking comfort or escape in behaviors like compulsive masturbation or viewing pornography, that can become a learned response, a way to manage overwhelming internal states.
I saw some terms in the material, things like an original wound or internalized negative self-object in onso.
Yeah.
Can you unpack those a bit? What do they mean?
Yeah, absolutely. These terms, they basically describe a deep, often unconscious sense of being fundamentally flawed or unworthy or just somehow not okay at your core. Think of it like a hidden operating system running in the background, constantly generating this feeling of discomfort or inadequacy. And this deep-seated feeling, it can become this powerful, unconscious driver pushing you to seek external ways to soothe yourself or get validation, really anything to escape that internal pain. Compulsive behaviors often step in to fill that role. They become the escape route.
And that public disclosure you mentioned earlier, how does the material say that kind of experience impacts someone? It sounds devastating.
Oh, hugely impactful. The material suggests that having a deeply personal, traumatic incident disclosed publicly, especially by someone you should have been able to trust, and right in front of you would likely have just massively amplified feelings of shame and vulnerability. It essentially exposed a really painful part of your history in a way that just stripped away any sense of control or safety. And that experience, it could deeply ingrain the idea that certain aspects of your sexuality or your personal history are inherently shameful, dangerous to reveal, and must be hidden.
And that hiding, that secrecy, the research suggests that actually feeds the problem, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Shame thrives in secrecy. It wants you to hide. It leads to what the material calls a secret lifestyle or a double life. And this makes it incredibly difficult to be open, even with people who care about you, because the fear of judgment or rejection becomes this massive barrier. This isolation, ironically, is what stops you from seeking the very connection and help you need to heal.
Okay, Let's look at the behavior pattern itself for a moment. You described using pornography almost daily for nearly a decade and feeling out of control. How does that description fit with what the material describes?
Yeah, that description aligns very, very clearly with what the research identifies as compulsive behavior patterns in this context. It's characterized by exactly that loss of control you mentioned, spending excessive time on the behavior, and this is key, continuing to do it despite experiencing negative consequences from it in your life.
So it's definitely more than just a bad habit. It sounds like it's serving some kind of deeper function.
Often, yes. For many people, the material suggests this behavior becomes a primary way to engage with sexuality, or maybe even more significantly, it becomes a way to cope with difficult emotions.
Like what kind of emotions?
Oh, things like stress, loneliness, anxiety, boredom, even sometimes excitement or fatigue can trigger the behavior. Compulsive pornography use can become a kind of safe haven, or maybe a way to medicate problems or pain or unhappiness, as some accounts put it.
And I guess the easy access now, digitally.
Oh, absolutely. The easy, constant accessibility in the digital age definitely changes its potential impact. It makes falling into that daily pattern much, much easier than it might have been in the past.
Let's really zero in on that core conflict you mentioned right at the start, that intense wanting to quit. Every time I think about it, I want to quit, versus that feeling of being incapable. I don't feel capable of quitting. That push and pull seems so central to what you describe.
That ambiguity, like we discussed, it is a defining characteristic of this struggle. It's that fierce desire to stop, warring against that feeling of being utterly powerless to do so. But here's a really vital perspective from the material regarding your attempts to stop. Those repeated attempts and those short streaks, like your longest being around 20 days, they are not failure.
Really, not failures. Because I imagine it feels exactly like failure when it doesn't stick.
Oh, it absolutely feels like failure. Of course it does. And that's where so much shame rushes in. But the materials strongly suggest reframing these attempts. They're common, very common experiences on the journey towards recovery. And more importantly, they are incredibly valuable learning experiences. Each attempt builds self-awareness, it shows you what is possible, even for a short time, and it provides crucial data on your specific triggers and challenges.
Okay.
The key insight here really is that recovery is a process, not an event. It takes consistent effort. It involves learning new skills over time. That 20-day streak, that's powerful evidence of your capacity to change, and it's a source of data about what works and what doesn't for you.
That is actually a much more hopeful way to look at those experiences. And you also mentioned earlier that continued willingness to try, even when feeling incapable, you called it a spark.
Yes, that spark of willingness, that part of you that keeps wanting something different even when it feels completely impossible. That is the crucial starting point. It's powerful. It's a testament to a part of you that truly desires something fundamentally different, something more real. And it connects to this idea that deep down, you likely desire real connection and intimacy far more than the fantasy and isolation that compulsive use provides.
And I guess the pain you're feeling, the negative consequences you mentioned, guilt in relationships, feeling trapped, neglecting other things, those are probably what fuel that desire to quit in the first place, right?
Exactly right. The material points out that the desire to quit often stems directly from the pain and the negative fallout the behavior brings into your life. It is the impact on relationships, those feelings of guilt and shame afterwards, neglecting other important parts of your life, and that awful sense of being trapped or hopeless. That's what motivates you to seek something else. That pain is a signal, really, that the behavior isn't truly serving you anymore.
Okay, so if we understand the roots better and the pattern, and we acknowledge that internal conflict, what does the material actually suggest are the paths forward? What are the key concepts, the strategies for actually breaking free?
Right. The material offers several really actionable insights that can provide new perspectives and, importantly, tools. One fundamental shift in thinking is crucial right at the start, separating your core self from the compulsive behavior and from the painful history.
So that idea of you are not your addiction or your history.
Precisely that. The material makes a really strong case that the behavior is a learned coping mechanism. It's something developed over time, often starting very young, but it is not the essence of who you are as a person. In that perspective, it's incredibly empowering because it shows that change is possible. You are more than your past actions or the stories built around them. Recognizing this truth is what allows you to start making choices in the present moment, rather than feeling like your history, or what some might call the addict mind, dictates everything.
And shame. You mentioned shame being such a huge hurdle.
It really is, a massive one. The material highlights that shame is a barrier, not a reason to hide. Shame makes you want to curl up and hide and isolate yourself, which tragically just perpetuates the whole cycle of secrecy and using. So sharing your struggle, even just doing what you've done by reaching out to explore this, that's the very first step towards breaking free from shame's grip. Talking about it, whether it's with trusted friends, a therapist, or support groups, that's described as the absolute beginning of the healing process.
So connection is key.
Connection is absolutely key to counteracting the isolation that shame enforces. The material really emphasizes exploring things like support groups, groups like SLAA, SAA, SA, or even online forums, or finding an accountability partner, someone who can offer a safe, non-judgmental space just to share what's going on.
Okay, so it's not just about gritting your teeth and trying to suppress the urge. You need to understand it better, like identifying triggers and understanding the why.
Exactly. Instead of just fighting the desire head-on all the time, which is exhausting, the material suggests becoming a bit of a detective about your own patterns, really understanding when and where and why the urge pops up. Maybe keeping a journal, tracking the circumstances, the emotions, like you said, loneliness, boredom, stress, anxiety. Sometimes even happiness can be a trigger, and the thoughts that come before the urge. This helps you see the patterns and maybe predict vulnerable moments.
Right.
Recognizing that the behavior is often a coping strategy for difficult emotions, or sometimes even pleasant ones you don't know how to handle. That's a crucial piece of the puzzle. It's not random. It's usually linked to your internal state or what's happening around you.
That sounds like it requires a lot of conscious effort, becoming that aware. What about those really ingrained compulsive thoughts, the ones that tell you you can't stop?
Ah, yes. A really important point. The material touches on what's often called the addict voice, or sometimes the addict's subpersonality. Those thoughts whispering or maybe shouting, I can't stop. Just one more time won't hurt. It's not that bad. Everyone does it.
Yeah, those kinds of thoughts.
The material identifies those as the voice of the compulsion itself, or the ingrained pattern. It's not your true, deeper self, the self that wants connection and peace. So learning techniques to consciously challenge those thoughts, or even mentally dialoguing with that part of you, that can help create distance and weaken its power over time. It's about consciously recognizing and then interrupting those automatic ingrained thought patterns.
And it sounds like from what you're saying, it's not just about stopping a behavior, but actively building something new in its place. That idea of focusing on building, not just stopping.
Absolutely. This is a really positive focus. The material emphasizes shifting your energy, not just fighting the unwanted behavior all the time, but actively cultivating a new, fulfilling life that actually makes the old patterns less appealing. The question shifts to, what do you want to start doing? What brings you meaning? Maybe exploring interests, hobbies, activities that bring you genuine joy and connection. Investing time and energy in real relationships, fostering deeper intimacy and belonging. The goal, as it's often described, isn't just abstinence, stopping the behavior. It's building a life so rich and meaningful that the compulsive behavior loses its grip because you simply have better, more fulfilling ways to cope and connect.
And you mentioned that 20-day streak wasn't a failure, but a foundation. So the focus should be on small, consistent steps.
Yes, absolutely. That previous best streak, it's powerful evidence of your capability. It's a foundation to build on, not some kind of limit you can't surpass. The material really stresses the power of focusing on setting small, achievable goals, sometimes just getting through today or even just the next hour without acting out, and celebrating those smaller victories. They build momentum and confidence.
Right.
Consistency in applying these new skills and strategies, even imperfectly, is key. And crucially, learning from slips, viewing them as learning opportunities rather than letting them completely derail you back into shame and despair, that's identified as a vital part of the process for most people. It's data, not destiny.
Okay. And finally, you touched on the guilt you feel in your relationship. Reclaiming intimacy and connection seems really important here.
Your guilt, it points directly to the impact this behavior is having on your relationship, and also to your desire for something different, something better. The material explains that compulsive pornography use can definitely interfere with real intimacy. It leads to feelings of disconnection, both within yourself and with a partner. So as you progress on this path, learning how to communicate openly and honestly about your struggles when you feel safe and ready, of course, and in a way that avoids unnecessary graphic details that could actually be harmful to your partner, that can be a powerful part of rebuilding trust and fostering genuine connection. True intimacy requires vulnerability and presence, which is really the opposite of hiding and compulsion.
So coming back to that feeling, that powerful feeling of not being capable of quitting, even though you desperately want to, The material seems to be saying that your very choice to start trying right now, to even be exploring this with us, despite feeling that incapacity, is the key.
Precisely. That's exactly it. The decision to act in alignment with the part of you that knows a different life is possible, that part that keeps that spark alive. Like we said, even when the part that feels defeated and incapable is shouting really loudly. That is exactly where transformation begins. That willingness, combined with exploring the underlying reasons, understanding the roots, and then actively building new coping mechanisms and genuine connections, that is the path forward described in the material. It's about taking action, however small, from that place of willingness.
And the overall message from the material seems really clear that recovery and experiencing true intimacy are actually possible, even from the lowest points.
That is a powerful and consistent message throughout. Your willingness to lean into that desire to quit, to learn from your history without being defined by it, and to take these steps forward even when it feels incredibly daunting. That is the path towards freedom and genuine connection.
Wow. This has been a really deep dive into some incredibly vulnerable, important territory. We've looked at how the past can lay a foundation. We've recognized the nature of the struggle in the present and explored that path forward through embracing willingness, understanding the roots, challenging those old patterns, building new skills, and really cultivating genuine connection both with yourself and with others.
And just to reiterate, asking for help and connecting with others on this journey, these are signs of immense strength, truly, not weakness. Your journey towards freedom is absolutely worth the effort, and the material really confirms that the possibility for change is real.
And maybe here's something to leave you with, just drawing from everything we've explored in the material today. Perhaps the greatest strength isn't found in trying to break free from the past by sheer force, but maybe it's found in the courage to build authentic connection in the present. Allowing that vulnerability, the very thing that feels scary, to become the source of true intimacy and ultimately lasting freedom.